Then thirdly, and this is not a policy statement, it is a budget statement. If the city of Oakland passes the Kids First program, that will encumber the general purpose fund to the tune of $17 million. It's not magic. So if you take that $17 million and put it into a reserve fund that is called for in that measure, you've got to take $17 million out of programs and staff that we're already employing. Can't print money. So that's another future issue that we need to face. Those four issues are there. Now, let's go back to our immediate problem. How did we end up with $10 million in our general fund reserve? Last year, we started with $75 million. Last year. But that wasn't really true because we had $20 million of previously approved projects and purchasing encumbrance to the tune of $20 million. So you subtract $20 million from $75 million, so we really started with $55 million. But not quite. Because when we passed the two-year budget, 07-08, we passed a budget that called for $170 million in revenue, $470 million in revenue and $477 million in expenditures, $7 million short. So when that budget was passed, it was already anticipated up front that we would dip into the cash balance in order to find that $7 million to balance the budget. So now you've gone from 75 million minus 20 to 55 million. That's $7 million, which was anticipated, the difference between 477 and 470. You follow me? Subtract that. Now we're down to $48 million. But then something happened last year. It was called deficit to the tune of $24 million. $14 million in unbudgeted expenditures, most of it police department. Overtime, backfill, training, academies, etc. And frankly, that category was unrealistically funded in the first place, and that can get talked about. That's $14 million. The other $10 million was revenue that we anticipated that did not come in by virtue of the economics of the country, the state, and locally. Net $10 million. We lost $30 million in property transfer taxes. But we last year had better than we anticipated in real estate taxes, sale taxes, etc. So about that ended up about $20 million. So the net difference was $10 million. $10 million in revenue that didn't come in, $14 million in expenditures that was unbudgeted, $24 million deficit, which means a $24 million hole we had to close. So remember, we were at 48 million, right? So now we subtract 24 million, we're down to $24 million. So we ostensibly started this budget year with $24 million in our general purpose fund reserve, our checkbook, available uncommitted cash. But that really wasn't true because there were $14 million in carry forward projects that were unfunded and encumbrances from last year, $14 million. Subtract $14 million from $24 million, $10 million. So here's a city the size of Oakland with a general purpose fund reserve of $10 million. That's incredible. So the practice of dipping into our cash reserve is over. Okay, now, so what's new now? $6.4 million in the budget adjustment that we went through mid-cycle, okay, that wasn't dealt with was still a deficit, and it's still there. Look at the books. There was a carryover of $6.4 million deficit that we needed to deal with. What's new beyond that? $31 million deficit this year. Loss of revenues of $18 million. Property transfer tax, where we lost most of the money. And $13 million in unappropriated expenditures, or expenditures that we didn't budget for. $13 million and $18 million, $31 million, plus $6.4 million, $37.4 million deficit in our general purpose fund. So that is the deficit that we must address. 27 million of that, we engaged in a process with, in a team effort with our city department heads, and a combination, and I'll go into a whole bunch of detail, but in a combination of increased revenues, staff freezes, elimination of positions. If my memory serves me correctly, 86 positions, 50 of them filled, which means 50 people would lose their jobs. 86. No, see, no, you're in front of me. I'm not there yet. And I appreciate your point, but you're right. 86 total staff people, but I haven't gotten to the LAD, because I'll get to the numbers on the LAD, because the LAD, we close off 46 positions, 34 of them filled. So when my colleague said 84, she was absolutely right. You add 50 and 34, that means 86 people total. But I haven't gotten to the LAD yet, so she's right.
134 positions closed,
right.
Which 50 or so.
Yeah, I got it. It's all up here. There's no notes, people. It's all up here. So with respect to the general fund, we found $27 million in cuts. Now, in a 6 weeks process, I cannot look at you and say that every single decision was based on absolute strategic planning. 6 weeks is a short time to do a great deal. But it also was not a meat axe approach. So the truth lies somewhere in the middle. We tried to get it done, all right? I welcome from all department heads, even at this stage as we continue to refine the process, if you can come with even more creative, exciting, and strategic options, I welcome that, because my hope is that the City Council and I will engage in a collaborative civil discourse on how we embrace the budget. So we ought to be able to talk with each other about options, okay? So I welcome from city staff, from city department heads, even at this moment, creative alternatives so that we can continue to go. This needs, the order of the day needs to be flexibility, it needs to be collaboration, it needs to be inclusiveness and transparency. So that's there. So we found 27 million, but we have a $37 million deficit. How do we close the 10 million? Here's where we try to provide options. The city administration has the authority to do two things. One, you can fine $10 million if you shut the government down 1 day a week for the next 33 weeks. That's the remainder of the calendar year. That's an option. That will get you $10 million. Second option is to terminate 120 people. That will get you $10 million. Or you can mix and match. With respect to the shutdown, I want to say to my labor union colleagues, I am prepared to engage with you in a conversation, not limited to, but inclusive of flexible furloughs, concessions. We can talk about all of that, okay? So this is flexible. Again, our opportunity to discourse with each other in that regard.